many years ago. In the jungles of southern Asia, there were missionaries that lived in what was called back then a compound. Now, a compound, sometimes today that doesn't have a very nice connotation, but back then it was a good thing, and it simply meant that the missionaries there had maybe their house, maybe a little clinic that was there, maybe some other buildings in the jungle, and around that jungle was a fence of some sort. And the fence was there to keep out wild animals, maybe to keep out thieves and that kind of a thing. It had usually a gate or a door that you could shut, and it was usually a safe place. Well, the missionaries were doing just fine, working for the Lord and doing medical work, when one day they said to one another, you know what, there's a certain kind of medicine that we need, and we are almost out. So they thought, well, what can we do? And they said, well, you know, there's another mission compound. It's less than a day's walk from here. If we can leave early in the morning and get that medicine, we can rush back and get back into our compound safe and sound before the sun goes down. Because you see, being out in the jungle late at night is not a good idea. And so they made their plans, and they set a certain day, and sure enough, that day, they got up very early in the morning. The sun had just started to come up over the trees, and they headed out towards the other compound. Now, in that part of the country, the hills there was lots of rolling hills and dense jungle. You had to stay on the path, such as it was, through the jungle there if you were going to travel safely. And the path took them down the side of a valley, and at the bottom of the valley was a river. Now, the river was pretty easy to get through. It was maybe that deep or so. The water was running fairly swiftly, but it wasn't very deep, and so they knew they could make it through. They carefully made their way across the river. They got to the other side, and they made their way up the path, zigzagging up the other side of the hill, and not too long later, they made it to the other missionary compound. Well, missionaries back then didn't see each other very often, even though they weren't that far apart, and they were so glad to see each other. They said, oh, well, what brings you here? They said, well, we need such and such a medicine. They said, well, good news, we have some. They went to their supplies, and they got the medicine that they needed. They put it in their bags, and they said farewell. They said, we have to hurry if we're going to get back in time before the sun goes down. So they had their things, and they were hurrying down the path, not running, but walking as quickly as they could. And they came to that same valley, and they went zigzagging down, and they got about halfway down when they heard a sound. And it wasn't a sound that they wanted to hear, and it was a sound that they were hoping that they would not hear. You see, in that part of the world, bandits were fairly common. You may not know what a bandit is. A bandit is a thief. And those types of thieves, they would wait for people on the trail, and they would rob them. Sometimes they would hurt them, too. You see, out in the middle of the jungle, you can't call the police to come and help you. And so the missionaries were there, and they heard the sound of voices. And they were not happy voices. They were excited voices. And they were further up the hill. And they looked, and of course you can't really see through the jungle very well, but they looked up the hill, and then they heard it again. They heard some voices come in, and they said, oh no, could it be? What if it is bandits? Well, they picked up the pace, and they began to head faster and faster down the side of that canyon there. And then every now and then they would stop and they would listen, and it seemed like the voices were getting closer, and they thought, based on the sound of the voice, and they could hear a word every now and then, oh, it must be those bandits. What are we going to do? They rushed down there. They made it down the zigzag path, and they came to the river. And in just the last few hours since they had been there, that river had taken a dramatic change. Now, you probably know about this change, even though you may not know that you know. You see, right here in Newmarket, if you go down to River Road, and you go there maybe in the middle of the day, and you'll look, and the river is at a certain level, if you come back, even though it hasn't rained right here, if it's rained further up in the hills in West Virginia, if they had a big thunderstorm and lots of rain, the water level here in Newmarket can go up 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, sometimes even, if it's really bad, maybe 7 or 8 or 9 feet. In just the space of a few hours. Well, that's what had happened at that river that those missionaries came to. There was no way they could get across that river now. And they looked back up at that trail that was coming down. They thought those bandits are going to be coming around that corner at any moment now. Now, what would you do if you were caught in that situation? Well, if you were a Christian like they were, I'll bet you would pray. And that's exactly what they did. They dropped their packages, and they dropped to their knees, and they said, oh, Lord, please help us, save us. There's nothing we can do. These bandits are coming. Please help. And right at that moment, a sound came to their ears. Actually, it wasn't so much of a sound. You know, there are some things that you feel more than you hear. Well, this was kind of like a small earthquake. It was like something was breaking deep underground. It's like boom, and the earth would move, and then they heard some rustling, and they looked up, and there was a gigantic tree. Not near the riverbank. It was set back from the riverbank. A gigantic tree was tipping, and finally it was falling all the way across that river and landing on the other side, well up the bank above the water. It was a huge tree. What they had been feeling were roots that were breaking underground. And without even saying amen, these missionaries knew that an angel had pushed that tree over, and they grabbed their bags, and they got on that trunk, and they climbed up through the roots, and they made their way across, and they got to the other side, and they made it safely back to their compound. Now, children, listen carefully. There are many times in this life when you won't know what to do. When you feel like there's trouble that's facing you, and you don't know what to do, and you think, I don't know what to do. Remember, Jesus has 1,000 ways to help us that we don't know anything about. Don't be afraid simply because you don't know what to do, but trust in Jesus. He does know exactly what to do, and he will help you just when you need it. You can go back to your sofas now.